The arrogant billionaire Thomas Harrington declared, "Whoever solves this problem owns the company." 200 engineers were completely lost until the humble waitress pulled up a chair, and exactly 60 seconds later she did something that silenced the entire room. What did the waitress have that the 200 engineers lacked? Follow the story to discover what happened that evening. Almost 1,000 million euros in investment, and this is the best they can offer. Thomas Harrington's voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the melodious piano music in the Alhambra Palace restaurant like shattered glass. It was cold, controlled, and that very control was the most terrifying thing. He sat with his back straight in his tailored suit, but the tension in his shoulders suggested a storm was about to break. Robert, his assistant, bowed his head, avoiding his boss's gaze. "Sir, we've tried every option. This problem is beyond our projections." Thomas let out a dry, humorless snort. He hadn't touched the Wagyu steak in front of him, which had long gone cold. All his attention was fixed on the tablet placed in the center of the table. On the screen, a complex three-dimensional model spun wildly amid countless red error warnings. This was the heart of the quantum project, a supposedly unbreakable quantum encryption system that Thomas had clearly managed to break himself. "We've just lost the contract," Thomas said, his voice hissing through clenched teeth. 5,000 million euros gone because of what you call our best effort. This was more than a simple failure. It was a humiliation. Thomas Harrington did not fail, and certainly not like this, at a business dinner that was supposed to be a celebration. He picked up his wine glass, then slammed it down. A sharp clack echoed, and a few drops of dark red wine splashed across the immaculate white tablecloth like a confession. His impotence fueled his arrogance. He pushed the tablet toward Robert, his voice slightly louder, loud enough for nearby tables to glance over. "Solve this problem," he announced, his voice dripping with sarcasm, "and the company is yours." Robert and the chief engineer offered forced smiles, a bad joke. Those nearby who heard it simply shrugged, just another rich man dramatizing his life. They quickly returned to their own conversations. A figure approached. The young waitress came with a water pitcher. She moved gracefully, skillfully avoiding chairs, almost blending into the background piano music. Her name was Sophia. She had only been working there for 6 weeks, taking night shifts to pay her rent. She was used to elegantly dressed clients, sarcastic comments, and looks that passed through her as if she were air. As Sophia leaned to pour water for Thomas, she had no intention of looking at the screen in front of him. But the blue glow caught her eye, and she paused. The symbols, the model, the repetitive code sequences, they were too familiar. Her heart skipped a beat. She had seen this kind of structure before, during her long months of research in her university days. She said nothing. She continued pouring the water, set down the pitcher, and prepared to turn away. But Thomas's words still rang in her mind, clear and sharp. "Whoever solves this problem owns the company." A statement anyone here would consider a joke, but for Sophia, it was an open challenge. She stood still for a few seconds, thoughts racing chaotically. She knew she shouldn't interfere. It was taboo for a waitress to meddle in a guest's affairs. But a part of her, the part that loved technology, that had devoted her youth to research, could not stay silent. Thomas noticed she hadn't left yet. He frowned, his voice hoarse with fatigue. "Is there a problem?" Sophia stood, hands still holding the water pitcher, her eyes calm. Her voice wasn't loud, but it was clear. "I think I know where the error is." The entire table fell silent. Robert looked up in surprise. The other partner leaned forward slightly, thinking he had misheard. Thomas stared at her for several seconds, unsure whether to laugh. "What did you say?" "That model." Sophia nodded slightly toward the tablet. "You assume the quantum particles are static, but the simulation data indicates motion. The result is wrong from the foundation." The statement was simple but full of confidence. Some nearby tables turned, as her voice was loud enough to cut through the piano music. Thomas Harrington, the billionaire known for his cold demeanor, straightened, his gaze fixed on the girl in the restaurant uniform. "You just said the foundational assumption is wrong." "Yes. You can't simulate kinetic energy using a static system," Sophia replied, her voice low, firm, and fearless. "I wrote my thesis on this topic." No one spoke anymore. Robert turned to Thomas with an uncomfortable look. "She seems to know what she's talking about." Thomas watched her for a long moment. Something shifted in his mind, subtle but real. She tilted her head. "I apologize if I overstepped. I simply couldn't pretend not to see such an obvious error. Then she walked away, leaving the three men stunned in silence. Sophia returned to the service counter, setting down her tray. She could hear her heart pounding fast, her hands trembling slightly. But she felt no regret. She didn't know if what she had done was foolish or brave. She only knew that after a long time, she felt truly alive again. In the corner of the room, Thomas kept watching her retreating figure. He said nothing, but in his mind the phrase repeated word for word. You can't simulate kinetic energy using a static system. A small phrase, but enough to make him want to know who she was. A man of immense power had just been challenged by a waitress, and he didn't know this would be the beginning of everything changing. Sophia set the water pitcher on the table, a small but decisive action. The soft clink of glass against wood was her only response to Thomas's question. She didn't say her name. Instead, she repeated her statement, her voice still firm, without the slightest tremor. I said I think I know where the error is. Robert interrupted quickly, his voice full of annoyance. Excuse me, could you return to your duties? We are having an important meeting. He saw her presence as a distraction, a violation of space. But Thomas raised a hand, a brief commanding gesture that silenced Robert. He leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms over his chest, eyes narrowed as he evaluated Sophia from head to toe. A condescending smirk spread across his lips. No, let her speak. This is fascinating. A waitress is going to give me a lecture on quantum technology. The mockery in his tone was palpable. But Sophia didn't flinch. She had faced worse looks than this. She looked directly at the chaotic model on the screen, not at Thomas. This is parallel quantum encryption, she began, her voice sounding more like a professor giving a lecture than a waitress. Your model assumes quantum particles are static data points and tries to correct the error for each point individually. But the problem isn't in the particles, it's in the relationship between them. She looked up, meeting the chief engineer's eyes. The core issue is their interaction within a flow of motion. You're trying to freeze a river instead of navigating its current. She didn't use overly complicated jargon. She pointed out the flaw in the very philosophy, in the fundamental logic of the problem. Silence descended. The smile vanished from Thomas's lips. He turned to the chief engineer, who was stunned. She's right, the engineer said, looking at the screen, then back at Sophia, stammering. Theoretically, she has a point. We were too focused on the details and lost the big picture. The atmosphere around the table froze. The contempt in Thomas's eyes faded, replaced by intense, almost dangerous, curiosity. He pushed the tablet toward her. Fine, prove it. He repeated his earlier challenge, but this time without sarcasm, his voice cold and serious. If you can do it, this company is yours. Sophia looked him straight in the eyes. Are you serious? I never joke about money, Thomas replied dryly. Without a moment's hesitation, Sophia placed her service tray on a nearby empty table. She untied her white apron, folded it carefully, and placed it on top of the tray. Then she pulled up an empty chair and sat at their table. The surrounding diners began to notice the strange scene, a waitress who had just joined the dinner of one of the city's most powerful men. Sophia's fingers glided across the tablet's touchscreen, quick, decisive, and with immense confidence. She didn't fix every error line of code. She went straight to the central structure of the algorithm, not correcting, but restructuring. She changed a few fundamental parameters regarding particle interaction that Thomas's 200 engineers had overlooked. The entire restaurant seemed absolutely silent. Only the soft clicks of her fingers on the screen could be heard. 10 minutes. That was all the time she needed. She pressed the restart simulation button. The chaotic three-dimensional model on the screen stopped spinning. It began to move smoothly, molecular chains joining in a stable flow. Then all the red error warnings disappeared. In their place, a single line of green text appeared in the center of the screen. Verification successful. The entire table was speechless. Robert and the chief engineer gasped, unable to believe what they had just witnessed. Thomas sat motionless, his darkened eyes staring at the screen, then at Sophia. His emotions were a complex tangle: shock, shame, and undisguised admiration. For the first time in his life, he was completely defeated, not by a formidable business rival, not by a market fluctuation, but by a waitress who had just solved a multi-billion-euro problem in 10 minutes right in front of him. Sophia gently pushed the tablet back across the table, returning it to Thomas, and simple, decisive action. "It's done," she said, not boastfully, but like a craftsman who had just completed her work. That action broke the stunned silence. The restaurant manager, a handsome middle-aged man named David, hurried over. He had been watching the strange spectacle from afar with growing anxiety. "Mr. Harrington, I sincerely apologize for this inconvenience," he said, his voice full of remorse, glaring severely at Sophia. "I'll take care of this immediately." "Take care of what?" Thomas asked, his voice still firm, but his eyes fixed on Sophia. He didn't even look at David. "My staff has been bothering you," David stammered. Thomas finally turned to him. He said nothing, just looked. A cold, emotionless look that carried the weight of an order. David understood immediately, bowed his head, muttered another apology, and quickly retreated, leaving a space of silence around the table. Then Thomas turned to Robert and the chief engineer, both still staring at the screen in disbelief. "You two can go." It was a polite dismissal. They nodded mechanically, stood, gathered their things in shame and confusion. Before leaving, the chief engineer turned to Sophia with genuine respect evident in his eyes. "Thank you." Sophia simply nodded slightly. Now only the two of them remained, sitting face to face amid cold plates and distant piano music. The tension had vanished, replaced by a heavy curiosity. Thomas spoke first. The condescension was gone from his voice, replaced only by intense focus. "Where did you learn all that?" "MIT," Sophia replied succinctly, her eyes fixed on the apron she had placed on the chair. The word escaped her lips like a sigh, recalling a world she had lost. Thomas froze for a second. "MIT," he repeated, as if trying to connect two completely unrelated pieces of information. "An MIT student, and now you're cleaning tables and serving water in this restaurant." Sophia offered a weak, sad smile. "That's a long story." She looked up, meeting his eyes, her gaze no longer defensive, but a mix of exhaustion and wounded pride. "When people take everything from you, your honor, your career, even your name, you have to find a way to survive, no matter how." That phrase touched a hidden corner in Thomas's personality. He understood how this world worked. He had witnessed rivals destroyed, careers ruined. But hearing it from this girl, who had just demonstrated extraordinary talent, carried a completely different meaning. His initial contempt had vanished entirely, replaced by curiosity and something bordering on admiration. The promise of the company, said in arrogance, now seemed ridiculous. He made a more serious and practical offer. "Tomorrow at 10 in the morning, come to my office in Phoenix Tower. I want to hear your full story." He pulled out his wallet, taking out a black credit card. "And I'll pay you 100,000 euros for what you did tonight." Sophia stood. She didn't look at the card. She picked up her apron, expertly tying it back on, an action like putting on a piece of armor. "I'll come," she said, her voice calm but firm. "But I don't need your money. I just need you to listen." She gave a polite bow, then turned and walked toward the kitchen area, blending back in with the server staff. She left Thomas alone at the table with the fixed tablet, the credit card on the table, and a story he knew he absolutely had to hear. Exactly at 10 in the morning the next day, Sophia crossed the glass revolving doors of Phoenix Tower. She wasn't wearing the waitress uniform. Instead, she wore dark jeans, simple and clean, and a white shirt. Her hair was still neatly tied back. She didn't look like a waitress, nor like a tech genius. She was simply someone coming to tell a story. The reception had been informed in advance. Without hesitation, she was taken straight to the upper floor in a private elevator, fast and silent. The elevator doors opened directly into Thomas's office. It was a vast space, 3 glass walls with views over the entire Madrid skyline. The skyscrapers looked like toys. The interior was minimalist and expensive, but the contrast between his world and the world she lived in had never been so stark. Thomas had his back to her, looking out the window, hands clasped behind him. He wasn't sitting behind his desk, and deliberate action to minimize the power difference. When he heard the elevator doors open, he turned. "Hello," he said. His voice lacked the tension of the previous night. He gestured toward the sofa in the corner. "Please, sit." Sophia sat with her back straight. She didn't seem overwhelmed by the luxury. She simply waited. Thomas sat in the chair opposite her. Between them was a glass coffee table. He got straight to the point. "Last night you said people took everything from you. Who?" Sophia took a deep breath. She began to tell her story, her voice firm, without a tremor, as if recounting facts in a report. I had a startup called Lamina Tech. I co-founded it with my ex-boyfriend, Alex Harrington. We were the stars of the MIT Computer Science Department, specializing in quantum encryption. She spoke of sleepless nights in the lab, the excitement when they achieved their first breakthroughs, initial venture capital contracts. We built everything together from scratch. I trusted him completely, until one day I discovered by chance that every patent, every piece of intellectual property we created together, was only in his name. It had been changed. Thomas frowned, a visceral reaction from a businessman who understood the value of intellectual property. Why didn't you sue him? A weak, almost imperceptible smile crossed Sophia's lips. I tried. But he had prepared everything in advance. He used investor money to hire the best legal team in New York, while I had only meager savings. He painted me as a greedy opportunist trying to steal his work. She paused, looking out the window at the vast city. No one believed me. The investors sided with him. Mitt froze my academic records due to ongoing legal disputes. I was blacklisted in the industry. I lost everything, from a promising founder to a penniless person drowning in legal fees. So I started waitressing to pay debts and survive. She turned to look Thomas directly in the eyes. Have you ever seen this world when there's no room left for truth, Mr. Harrington? Thomas remained silent for a long time. He had faced ruthless rivals, dirty corporate schemes. But Sophia's story touched something deeper, absolute betrayal by the person she loved and trusted most. He could see the hidden resilience beneath her calm exterior, a strength forged by pain. For the first time, he didn't see her as a valuable asset he had just found, but as a person who had suffered an injustice that money could never compensate. He spoke, his voice lower, more intimate. Call me Thomas. When Sophia left the office, the door closed softly behind her. Thomas remained standing by the window, looking at the second access card lying on the table, the copy he had quietly kept for himself. For the first time, he wasn't sure if he was testing her or fearing to trust her too much. After Sophia left, Thomas didn't return to work. He stayed on the sofa, staring at the space where she had Saturday. Her story repeated in his mind, not with pity, but with cold calculation. He could hire her, pay her a substantial salary, turn her into an effective tool to complete the quantum project. That was the usual way, the way Thomas Harrington had always operated. But something in her determined eyes, the way she spoke of betrayal without shedding a single tear, made him reconsider. He realized that what he needed wasn't an employee, but something else, something money couldn't buy. That night he called her. Robert had found her phone number in the restaurant's personnel files. Sophia, he said when she answered, his voice completely different from that of a commanding CEO. I want to invite you to dinner. Not at the Alhambra Palace, but somewhere we can just talk. He chose a small, cozy restaurant hidden in the San Miguel Market Cafe area, a place with exposed brick walls and simple wooden tables. No white tablecloths, no gloved waiters, a completely different world from the one he was used to, but closer to the world Sophia lived in. When she arrived, she still wore the simple clothes from the morning. They sat at a table by the window. The waiter placed 2 glasses of water on the table and left them alone. No expensive wine, no complicated menus, just raw truth. Thomas spoke first, his voice sincere. I've been thinking about your story all day. I want to understand, not because you solved my problem, but because you put me in it. How do you feel? She looked him straight in the eyes. You have the talent to change an entire industry, yet you accepted a job where no one could see that talent. Sophia smiled weakly, the first genuine smile he had seen. That's not acceptance, it's patience. I'm waiting for an opportunity, not charity. She took a sip of water. You're used to controlling everything with money and power. When you meet someone you can't buy with those things, it feels strange, doesn't it? Her statement hit the mark like an arrow. Thomas didn't evade it. He admitted it. Maybe. I built everything from nothing. I believe in strength and control. But I don't trust anyone but myself. I used to be like that too, Sophia replied, her voice slightly distant. Until I put my trust in another person and paid the price. But I still want to believe that somewhere there are people worthy of trust. At that moment, under the warm yellow lights of the cafe, they were no longer the billionaire and the waitress. They were two lonely people carrying their own scars. He was isolated by power. She was isolated by injustice. And in that isolation, they found an unexpected empathy. Thomas realized he was smiling, a genuine smile, not forced, not calculated. A smile he hadn't realized he had lost for so long. "I have another offer for you," he said, leaning forward. "Not 100,000 euros, nor the whole company as a joke. Come work for me, not as an employee, but as a partner. Let's rebuild that project together from scratch, as equals." Sophia looked at him, her eyes searching. But this time she saw no arrogance or calculation, only a sincere offer, a real opportunity. For the first time since her betrayal, she felt a glimmer of hope, a feeling that maybe she could start trusting again. Sophia didn't respond immediately. Instead, she did something simple. She picked up the menu and ordered a plate of pasta. That ordinary, mundane action was her answer. It meant yes. "I'll stay then. I accept." Thomas understood. He ordered his own food. Their dinner continued, but the atmosphere had completely changed. It was no longer an interview, but the first strategy meeting between two partners. 2 weeks later, Sophia Vale was no longer a name in a restaurant personnel file. She had a security card, an office right next to Thomas's, and a new title, Strategic Partner on the Quantum Project. She was reborn, her repressed energy and intellect unleashed. She dove into the work like a storm, challenging the engineering team, redrawing the entire system architecture, inspiring them with her sheer talent. Thomas often saw her staying late, standing before the huge whiteboard covered in complex equations, her face illuminated with pure passion. A new order had been established. But the past never stays buried. The phone rang from reception in Thomas's office on a Tuesday afternoon. Robert answered and immediately turned pale. "Sir," Robert said, covering the receiver, "there's a man named Alex Harrington in the lobby. He's demanding to see Ms. Vale. Security says he's causing a scene." At the same time, in her own office, Sophia stood before a glass whiteboard, marker in hand, completely absorbed in the flow of equations. She was so focused she didn't hear the phone ring. Suddenly the office door burst open. Robert rushed in, looking panicked. "Sophia, don't go out." Sophia turned, surprised. "What is it?" "Just stay here for a moment," Robert said, his voice tense. Then he hurried back to Thomas's office. The sudden warning unsettled Sophia. She walked to the door, opening a small crack. From there she could hear Thomas's voice over the intercom, cold and sharp. "Show me the lobby security camera." She held her breath. A large screen on the wall of Thomas's office, visible through the crack, switched to a feed of the main lobby. And then she saw him. Alex Harrington. Time seemed to stop. Even through the camera screen, his presence hit her like a punch to the stomach. Still the expensive suit, perfectly gelled hair, and the confident smile she had once loved deeply, and then hated to the core. He stood in the middle of the lobby, arguing loudly with the security chief, turning the Phoenix Tower lobby into his own stage. "I just want to meet with my former partner. Sophia Vale, she's working here, right? I just want to congratulate her on her new project." The marker in Sophia's hand fell to the floor with a dry clack in the silent room. Her breathing became shallow. That feeling returned, the feeling of helplessness, of being exposed to the world's eyes. The wall of security she had just built around herself over the past 2 weeks seemed to be collapsing. She heard Thomas order Alex to be brought up to the office. A part of her wanted to run, to find a corner to hide in. But another part, the scarred and hardened part, stayed still. She couldn't run forever. A few minutes later, she heard the door to Thomas's office open and close. She couldn't hear the conversation, but she could imagine it. Alex's smile, his smooth voice, malicious words wrapped in a varnish of courtesy. She sat in her chair, holding her head in her hands, trying to control her breathing. She had thought she was free of him. She had thought she could start over. But that shadow never really disappears. It was just waiting. A moment later, the door to Thomas's office opened again. She heard Alex's footsteps retreating, then the sound of the elevator. After that, silence. The door to her office opened softly. Thomas entered, holding 2 paper coffee cups. He said nothing, just silently placed 1 cup on her desk. The heat rose, carrying the familiar aroma of coffee. He sat in the chair opposite her, not as a boss, but as a friend. He looked at her whiteboard covered in equations. Looks impressive, he said softly. Sophia didn't ask if she was okay. He knew she wasn't. Sophia looked up, her eyes slightly dazed. What did he say? What he always says, Thomas replied, taking a sip of coffee. About a contract, about joint intellectual property rights. He's trying to claim ownership over your work. It's a lie, Sophia said, her voice trembling slightly. I know, Thomas cut in, his voice still calm but full of certainty. I looked him in the eyes and knew he was lying. But he fired a warning shot. He wants my employees to think we're involved in a scandal. Thomas set down his coffee cup. He looked her straight in the eyes, and this time she didn't see a powerful billionaire, she saw an ally. Listen, Sophia. Listen. He's doing this because he's afraid. He knows how talented you are and can't stand to see you shine somewhere else. He wants to drag you back into the darkness with him. He leaned forward. This is no longer your fight alone. He made it mine when he entered this building. And I never lose. His words weren't a cliché of comfort. They were a declaration, a commitment. They didn't dispel her fear, but they ignited another fire inside her, the fire of resistance. But this time she wasn't alone. Thomas stood, a decisive action that ended the conversation. Let's go, he said. Nothing gets resolved here. The action surprised Sophia. She thought he would start calling the legal team, begin a war from the top of the tower. But instead he grabbed his jacket and waited for her. Where to? She asked. Away from here, he replied. He wants to turn this office into a battlefield. We won't give him that satisfaction. He led her to the basement garage, to a black sedan that looked anything but ostentatious. He drove himself, taking her away from the bustling financial district toward the upscale residential area with views of the Madrid skyline. They didn't speak the whole way. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It felt like a necessary pause for both to breathe after the storm. He took her to his penthouse. This place didn't resemble his office. It was warmer, more personal, with book-lined walls and a grand piano in the corner. From the huge glass windows, the entire city of Madrid stretched below them like a carpet of lights. Want something to drink? He asked, loosening his tie. Water is fine, she replied. He handed her a glass of water, then stood beside her by the window. The view was breathtaking, but Sophia wasn't really seeing it. Her mind was still grappling with the image of Alex. You don't have to worry about him, Thomas said, his voice low and firm. My legal team will handle that contract. It's fraudulent, and we'll prove it. He turned to look at her, his eyes revealing a rare tenderness. I told you, this is no longer your fight alone. It's ours. In that moment, standing at the top of the world with his strong commitment, Sophia felt a defensive wall she had built over the past 2 years begin to melt. She had found an ally, someone who believed in her. She felt a faint gesture of gratitude cross her lips. But it was that very nascent trust that made what happened next feel even more cruel. Before we act, you need to know exactly who we are dealing with, Thomas said, his voice slightly different. I quit, she said, her voice turning cold and distant. I will no longer work for you. I will never involve myself with your family again. Let you two brothers solve your own mess. She turned, walking quickly toward the elevator. Sophia, wait, Thomas called, his voice showing a touch of panic for the first time. Where are you going? The elevator doors opened. Sophia stepped in without looking back. Away from here. Away from both of you. I'll find a way to survive on my own, as I always have. The steel doors began to close, gradually darkening Thomas's face, a face that was no longer that of a powerful billionaire, but of a man who had just lost the most precious thing he had found. When the cold steel door closed completely, Sophia leaned against the elevator wall. For the first time in 2 years, she let hot tears run down her cheeks. She wasn't just fleeing Alex or Thomas. She was fleeing the fragile hope that she could be trusted again. And the brutal truth was that perhaps she had been wrong. The elevator door closed, leaving Thomas alone in the penthouse silence. He remained motionless, staring at the cold steel door that had taken Sophia away. Her words still echoed in his head. You and he are different, the same deceitful blood. That phrase hurt more than any business failure he had ever experienced. But his whole life he had tried to be different, to escape the shadow of a family full of deception and hatred. Yet in the eyes of the only woman he had begun to trust, he was just a replica of the very things he despised. Meanwhile, Sophia left Phoenix Tower, blending into the anonymous crowd on the streets of Madrid. The tears had dried on her cheeks, leaving a cold sensation. She walked aimlessly, just wanting to get away from that place, from the lies, from the cruel game of the Harrington family. She returned to her small apartment, the only safe refuge she had left. She sat in the darkness, looking out the window. She had been right not to trust anyone. This world had no room for trust. She had survived the last 2 years alone, and she would continue to do so. Tomorrow she would find another job, maybe a cafe, a bookstore, anywhere where no one knew the name Sophia Vale or quantum technology. But as night fell, her initial anger began to fade, giving way to deeper pain. She remembered Thomas's look when he spoke of Alex, an old pain she could feel. She remembered how he protected her, how he said this is our fight. Perhaps she had been too hasty. Perhaps she had let fear of the past cloud the truth of the present. At the same time in the penthouse, Thomas didn't call the legal team. He didn't start a fight. Instead, he did something he had never done before. He ordered Robert to cancel all meetings for the next day and prepare a press statement, a statement that would change everything. The next morning, Sophia woke with a decision. She couldn't run forever. She needed to face the truth, no matter how painful. She opened her laptop, intending to write an official resignation email to Thomas, a final conclusion to everything. But when the screen lit up, a news headline caught her eye. CEO Thomas Harrington publicly declares legal war on his half-brother Alex Harrington and Lamina Tech. She quickly clicked on it. The article didn't just talk about a contractual dispute. Thomas had revealed everything, including his family relationship with Alex, a secret he had hidden his entire career. He condemned Alex's fraudulent behavior toward an unnamed scientist from whom everything had been stolen. He committed to using all resources of Harrington Corporation to seek justice for her and expose all financial irregularities at Lamina Tech. But the part that astonished Sophia most was the final paragraph of the statement. To ensure transparency and avoid any conflict of interest, I, Thomas Harrington, will temporarily step back from all activities related to the quantum project. Complete decision-making authority and intellectual property of this project will be fully transferred to my strategic partner. Her decision will be final. This project is hers and hers alone. Sophia read the passage over and over. He had relinquished control. He had placed the entire future of the multi-billion-euro project and his company's reputation in her hands. He wasn't trying to lure her back with words. He was proving it with actions. He was giving her absolute trust, even when she had turned her back on him. This wasn't the action of a deceiver. This wasn't a power game. This was a sacrifice. Her phone vibrated. It was a text message from Thomas. It contained only one line: "I've chosen my side. Now it's your turn." Sophia stared at her phone screen, then out the window. She had heard enough. Now it was time to fight. She stood, put on her jacket, and walked out the door. This time she knew exactly where she had to go. Sophia didn't go to Phoenix Tower. She took a taxi straight to another place, the headquarters of Lamina Tech. She entered the main lobby, where Alex used to be king, with a confidence she had never possessed before. She was no longer a victim fleeing. She was the owner of the quantum project, a force Alex could not underestimate. She demanded to see Alex Harrington. The receptionist initially refused. But when she introduced herself as Thomas Harrington's strategic partner and the key to the upcoming legal battle, the doors opened. She faced Alex in his own office. He looked tired and angry after Thomas's announcement, but still tried to maintain his smug facade. "Sophia," he said, "you're making a big mistake trusting him." "My biggest mistake was ever trusting you," she replied, her voice cold and fearless. "I didn't come here to argue. I came to inform you, this battle you've already lost." She placed a tablet on the desk, showing Thomas's press statement. "You thought I was Thomas's weakness, but you were wrong. I'm his weapon. And now this entire project belongs to me. Not only will I expose the fraudulent contract, today I'll work with Harrington Corporation's legal team to void every transaction, every email, every piece of evidence showing how you destroyed me." She leaned forward. "You may have taken my past, Alex, but I won't let you touch my future, or Thomas's." With that, she turned and left, leaving Alex stunned in his office, realizing for the first time that his power game had completely crumbled. Sophia left that building feeling a burden lifted. She had faced her ghost and won. Now she needed to face her future. She found Thomas, not in his office or the penthouse, but in a place she never expected, the small cafe in San Miguel Market where they had their first dinner. He was sitting alone at the old table with just a cup of coffee. She walked in silently and sat across from him. He looked up, and in his eyes was immense relief. He didn't ask where she had been. He didn't say, "I told you so." He simply waited. "I saw the press statement," Sophia said softly. "Why did you do that? You could lose everything." "I almost lost something more important," Thomas replied, looking her straight in the eyes. "Your trust. I realize control means nothing without someone to share it with. I hid the truth from you, and that was my mistake. This is the only way I can prove I'm really with you, not for a family dispute, but for who you are." Sophia reached out, placing her hand over his on the table. "I went to see Alex." Thomas looked slightly surprised. "I told him the fight is over," she continued, "and that he can never hurt either of us again." A genuine, warm smile spread across Thomas's lips. "So you chose your side?" "No," Sophia said, gently squeezing his hand. "I didn't choose a side. He chose us." She pushed her tablet toward him. On the screen was a new legal document she had drafted herself. Thomas read it. It was a new partnership agreement for the quantum project. Both names were listed at the top, as equal co-founders. "I promised the company was yours," Thomas said, slightly confused. Sophia shook her head. "I don't need your company, Thomas. I don't want to own this project alone either. I want a partner, someone I can trust." She looked at him, and this time there was no fear or doubt in her eyes, only certainty. "It's not yours, and it's not mine," she said. "It's ours." Thomas looked into her eyes, then at their intertwined hands. He had started this story with an arrogant joke of power, but in the end, he had found something bigger than his empire. They sat there under the warm yellow light of the cafe, no longer the billionaire and the waitress, no longer individuals carrying their own scars. They were two people who had met amid ruins and together were ready to rebuild, not just a tech project, but a shared future. 1 year later, at the International Technology Conference in Geneva, the Quantum Project, now officially known as Aegis Quantum, was honored with the Technological Breakthrough of the Year award. Its decryption system proved its invulnerability, setting a new global security standard. But the people who took the stage to accept the award weren't Thomas or Sophia. It was their entire engineering team. That was their joint decision. They wanted those who had worked tirelessly to be in the spotlight. Thomas and Sophia watched from the audience seats, sitting side by side. When Aegis Quantum was named, Thomas turned to look at her, not with the pride of a CEO, but with the gaze of a man looking at the woman he loves. "See," he whispered, "we did it." Sophia smiled, intertwining her fingers with his. "We are still doing it." After the ceremony, they didn't attend the lavish reception party. Instead, they took a walk along the shores of Lake Geneva. The air was fresh and cold. In the distance, snow-covered mountains appeared faintly in the twilight. "Do you remember the first night we met at the Alhambra Palace?" Thomas asked. "How could I forget?" Sophia laughed. "The night an arrogant billionaire planned to give his entire company to a waitress." "I no longer think it was arrogance," Thomas said, stopping and turning to face her. "I think it was destiny. The universe got tired of hearing me complain, so it sent the answer right in front of my eyes." He pulled a small black velvet box from his pocket. Sophia held her breath. "Sophia Vale," he said, his voice deep and sincere. "You restructured my algorithm, you restructured my company, and most importantly, you restructured my life. You taught me to trust, not just others, but to believe in a better future." He opened the box. Inside was a simple but exquisite ring with a small diamond shining like a star. "I don't just want to be your business partner," he continued. "I want to be your partner in everything. Will you marry me?" Sophia looked into his eyes that no longer held coldness or calculation, only love and respect. Tears of happiness ran softly down her cheeks. She didn't say yes. Instead, she smiled and said the phrase that had now become theirs, "It's all ours." And so the journey of Sophia and Thomas reached its quiet conclusion, or perhaps its first true beginning. They had walked together through so many late nights under Madrid's golden horizon lights, where ambition shone as brightly as the stars, tense mornings in glass-walled boardrooms where every word could shift the balance of power, and finally quiet afternoons like this, where silence spoke louder than success. Their story was never a fairy tale about Cinderella and a prince. There was no glass slipper, no magical transformation, no happily ever after delivered by fate. What they found was something far rarer and far more human, a partnership built on scars, mistakes, and courage. It wasn't perfection that bound them, but the willingness to understand each other beyond appearances. Because fairy tales end where reality begins. It reminds us that a person's greatest value doesn't always lie in where they are currently, but in the strength, brilliance, or tenderness already hidden, waiting for the right moment or the right person to be seen. A waitress can possess the mind of a strategist, the heart of a creator, or the silent intelligence that can change the course of an empire. And a billionaire who seems to command the world can still struggle with the one thing money can't buy: trust. Sophia never needed a savior. Thomas needed an opportunity, a door slightly open, a moment to prove her voice mattered. And Thomas, with all his wealth and control, didn't need another loyal employee. He needed someone unafraid to challenge him, to show him that true leadership isn't about having power over others, but about the humility to let someone else hold your trust. There is a quiet power in that, in the way people learn to lower their defenses, in the way they rediscover the strength of vulnerability. Perhaps the greatest lesson of their story isn't in the grand gestures or dramatic twists, but in the ordinary choices, the ones that often go unnoticed. When Sophia chose to speak in a room full of silence, she changed more than her fate. She reminded everyone that courage doesn't always roar, sometimes it whispers. When Thomas broke the contract instead of questioning her loyalty, he proved that faith can be stronger than suspicion. And when both realized that yours or mine would never be as powerful as ours, they unlocked something no amount of wealth, intellect, or influence could create alone: harmony. Maybe that's what love really is, not the collision of perfect souls, but the meeting of two imperfect ones who decide that together they are better. Their journey reminds us that transformation isn't always announced with fireworks. Sometimes it begins in quiet moments, in the act of listening, in the decision to forgive, or in the courage to start again. Sophia and Thomas didn't rewrite a fairy tale. They redefined success. They showed that triumph isn't measured in numbers, empires, or applause, but in the rare ability to see beyond what the world expects and to choose kindness when pride would be easier. As the sun set behind Geneva's snow-capped peaks that night, the light reflected on the lake like fragments of old dreams. Thomas's hand brushed Sophia's, and for a moment all the chaos of their past, the pressure, the expectations, the battles, faded away. There was no billionaire, no waitress, nothing. There were simply two people who had learned to rebuild, not just a company, but themselves. And perhaps that's the quiet magic of human connection, not something scripted by destiny, but crafted by choice, again and again, day after day. When we choose trust over fear, listening over judgment, believing that a new beginning can rise even from the ashes of failure. So perhaps this isn't the end of their story after all. Perhaps it's just the point where endings and beginnings merge into one soft intersection, where love, faith, and courage meet. Because at the heart of it all, their story isn't about business, wealth, or power. It's about being human, rediscovering oneself, hope, what it means to be human. And if there's one truth that endures after the final page closes, it's this: the most beautiful reconstructions are never made of steel or glass, but of trust. And trust, once shared, becomes the bridge that carries us towards something bigger, something we can finally call ours. This story concludes now, but I hope it opens something inside you, perhaps a bit of courage to speak, a bit of faith in those around you, or simply a reminder that no matter how much life challenges you, there's always a path to rebirth from the ashes, like a phoenix. Hello, thank you for taking the time to listen. I hope you found these moments meaningful. Wherever you are on your own journey, always stay firm in the belief in your own worth. I hope to meet you in the next story.